For those of you who'd like to follow the 23rd Psalm as we work on it, you'll find Bibles in the pews, and it's on page 429. Our worship leader, Gloria Donaher, mentioned the fact that when we began talking about the Psalm, it called forth a number of things to her. That's one of the problems of dealing with something as familiar as the 23rd Psalm, and we have to recognize that as all good poetry, it evokes many things from each of us. But I think it's good every so often to look at the Psalm. Last week I intended to cover the entire thing, and we got through about 3 verses. Let's quickly read it together, and I'll give you an overview of what we talked about, and then we'll be continuing on with some other of the aspects of the Psalm. Yahweh Ro'i, 2 words in Hebrew. The Lord is my shepherd, but we have to recognize, as we described last week, that Yahweh does not mean Lord. It's the name of God in the Old Testament. So it's Yahweh, a very personal name, the name revealed to Moses. Ro'i is an active participle. That means that the shepherd is not one who sits back waiting for people to come to him, but is one who goes out and seeks those. Rather appropriate for today's meditation that we've already had. There are an awful lot of volunteers that would be willing to help if they were asked, but there are an awful lot of people that need to make the effort and get out and do it. I shall not want. 4 words in Hebrew, but rather long in the English. In green pastures he causes me to crouch or lie down. Upon the waters of rest or quiet waters, tranquil waters is a good way to put it. How do they do it? He leads me. Well, that's about as good as any. He restores my soul. And we drew the picture last week of what it would be like to be in that barren land and traveling along parched, where after mile after mile after mile after mile after mile there's no water, and to suddenly hit the Jacob's well or one of these wells and find water. And when they say restores my soul, they're not talking about what we mean by the Greek soul, but they're talking about my total existence. Remember, the Hebrew at that particular point, both in his mindset and in his vocabulary, would use soul to mean self. Mind, body, spirit, everything that goes into me. And so when we say restoreth the soul, we're talking about a total replenishing of what it takes to be a human being. Okay? He leads me in the wagon ruts of righteousness for his name's sake. Paths are nice, broad, winding kinds of things. Bike paths, paths going through the woods. But the idea here is a heavy, grooved rut. We get so used to doing what is righteous and working with what is righteous that we have no way of getting out of it. When the time comes to do something, we act righteously because we have rehearsed it, we have practiced it, we have lived it, we have served it. And we do it not only because we have to do it, but we do it because we have an obligation under God for his name's sake to do it. Well, that's as far as we got last week. And a quick overview. So let's take a look at verse 4. Yea, the King James Version says, even though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, or great darkness, I shall fear no evil. As we've been dealing with the concept of finding time, we have to recognize that this is not something which is in the future, it's now. One of the things that we know as we're beginning to read the Bible over and over again is that much of what we have seen as being a future thing, yea, way off in the front future I'm going to face these kinds of things and I will fear no evil, is not what is meant here. What is meant is the here and now, and it continues into the future. Now, I daily walk in life through valleys with great shadows. Shadow of death is a beautiful thing, not because of the death, but because of the whole concept of fear. The darkness, which is so fearful to so many of us. Why is it that we're afraid of the dark? Do we really believe that all sin lurks in the darkness and in the bright of day it's gone? The pledge that is to be found here, and the statement which is to be found here, is that one walks his daily life in the shadows, even where there could be great evil, but under God I will fear no evil, none whatsoever. Why? Notice the change. Up to this point, it's the Lord in the third presence, but now it suddenly becomes second person. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Now that's an interesting one. One of the things that contemporary scholarship has done, I think, is clarified that a little bit. That's one we talked about when we originally did this. How does a rod and staff comfort one? When you stop and think about it, you've all seen the long staff that they used to walk with, and the hook, kind of a rod, and the hook staff that they've got. And some of you have had farm experience. Now, do you use the rod and the staff to comfort? Your kids probably say not. They've had the staff on the business end, you know. It's anything but comforting. It may comfort the parents, at least get off some of the tensions and hostilities, but it really doesn't do an awful lot of good for the kids. I had to belt David one the other day. He almost died afterwards, because after I had belted him, he sat down, and then he said to me, "Now, Dad, don't you think I'm too old for a spanking? And it really doesn't do any good anyhow. If it makes you feel better, I guess it's all right." About this time you want to, But what do you mean by thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me? Well, many scholars are now translating that, thy rod and thy staff, they lead me. If you've watched the shepherds out in the fields, they sit on their haunches and let the sheep kind of roam and keep track of them. But when they're taking them and leading them, they walk along, and on one end they tap the lead sheep this way, and on the other side this way, so that the sheep go the way they want. They can drive them right through the heart of town. A whole herd of sheep by walking just a little bit behind and keeping them on the road like this. Now there's a sense in which that makes it beautifully parallel to walking in the ruts of righteousness. You see, you're going down the right way, and even though you want to go off, you don't fear any evil because you know God's there giving you the right directions. He's not comforting in that sense. He's actually leading you, guiding you. You know that when you're walking in the righteous ways, whatever happens to you, you have the strength to handle. And I think it's a beautiful picture and a nice parallel of what it's all about. We are dumb like sheep are dumb. And the sheep are among the dumbest of animals. We need to be guided. We need to be led. We need to be worked on. And so, for a host of reasons which aren't important in terms of the language, some scholars are now saying, yea, even though, regardless of what it is, when I go through the times of testing and trial and tribulation, you're with me. I fear no evil. Your rod and your staff guide me to know. Now, isn't this New Testament? What does Paul say? There is no temptation taken you but such as is common to man, but God is faithful and just, and will provide a way out of it. One of my favorite verses. It's one I tremendously need. For all of us facing the trials and temptations of life say, "Oh, it's too much for me, I can't handle it. I don't have the ability. I'm doing this because I can do no other." It's nonsense. For thy rod and thy staff, they lead me. And for every temptation of life, there's an open door out, if we but permit ourselves to be led to it. Now, that's part of the biblical faith. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup overflows. What in the world does that mean? That is totally incomprehensible to the modern world. Can't you imagine me walking in and the first thing you do is pour Vitalis all over my head, running down over my coat and all of that, down dripping off the beard, sitting there at dinner, and there it is. That's the picture that's of Aaron. He shall have oil poured over his head, yea, it shall drip off his beard. Irv Britton, good friend of this church, many of you know him, always quoted that to me. I don't know what he'd do if you saw me when I came out of swimming where that really happens, 2 hours later, they're still dripping down, kind of a thing. Now, is that what they mean? I mean, that's crazy. How do you understand that? How do you, in all the years that you've looked at this, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies, thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Well, that's a difficult one unless you can put it back into the idea of what the ancient Near East did. We have a number of cases where this has actually happened. where accusers have made statements about an individual before a king, let us say. There's one case that dates back from about 1300 BC in northern Syria in a place called Ugarit. And the justification, when the king checked it out and found that these were false liars, the justification of that individual and his righteousness was precisely this. They had a banquet for that individual before the king, and all of his unjust accusers had to sit around and watch this man be defeated and listen to the praise of the king to this man. So that as they watched, they not only saw the one they tried to humiliate and bear false witness about standing before them, but they saw him raised over and above. Now, how many times when you see that as the picture here, have you said in your own lives, consciously or underconsciously, man, when they find out that I'm right, they're going to have to say, oh, you were right. You were justified. You told us, and then they'll know how good I am, right? Now, that's putting it a little bluntly and all that. You have better ways to do it and make it sound a little nicer, but that's what you mean. Hey, gang, I told you so. Ha, ha, ha. And that's what the whole picture is here, that the one who acts out of righteousness may seem to be out of touch with the world, but ultimately the idea is that when one is a righteous individual, what appears to the rest of the world to be stupid, out of touch, non-cheating on income tax. I thought only time that Dolores Burrs even got half mad at me in my whole existence, and then she wasn't mad, but she really checked me out. I told her that I had discovered a way to not pay any income tax for me. Oh, she went right through the ceiling. You mean that you would actually? I said, Dolores, I've discovered the way. I'm not doing it. And she said, well, I should hope not, because, I'd rather pay income tax than have Dolores come. The IRS is nothing in comparison. See, I can go down to the Bahamas next week, spend $300 and open up a business down there, which because of the Bahamian laws is a tax-free kind of a business, have the church send my checks down there, goes into the account, and I write checks on that account. And because I am writing checks on a business account out of the country, I have no taxes to pay. It's a very interesting kind of a scandal that's going on. Some of you have read about it, but I can do it, you see. So I could have a tax-free, plus all my trips down south that I want to take would be tax write-offs, if I should have any taxes to pay, because I'm going down to supervise my accounts and all that. No, I'm not going to do it. You see, I'm not going to do it. Not whatsoever, especially with you sitting behind me. But, keeping me honest. But the idea is that as you begin to look at what's happening, you get very, very much self-righteous about some things. And you say to yourself, am I doing what is the will of God? Or am I doing out of fear? Or am I doing what I should do? Or how do I approach these things? And the idea is that the righteous person ultimately is so in tune with God that he can't act unrighteously, and that he doesn't care what other people think. The first question coming out of our senior high group, when we were talking about who am I, the first series of questions developed around peer group pressure. The answer to the question of who am I for our high school kids revolved around who do my friends think I am? Not my parents, not my church, not even who I think I am. Who do my friends think I am? Now that's how they define themselves. What a difficult question to have to face. What do my friends think about me? And then they began to ask, as we probed a little bit, why do I listen to what my friends think about me? Why is that so important? Shouldn't I develop what I think about myself? And they began to move into that. But can you imagine the satisfaction of a young person, or you with your bosses, or somebody who does something because they know it's right, and people laugh at him and say, you're foolish. Why don't you take your accounts down to the Bahamas? Why do you write out checks every 3 months and make your payments to the income tax when you don't have to? How foolish you are! And can you imagine the feeling of somebody who has been through that and to find out later that they are justified because what they have done is right for them to do? And the picture is that there's a banquet, and the enemies sit around, And they are not only set high, the old style of the English college. Have any of you been in Oxford or Cambridge? The meeting room where the faculty sit up on a stage-like thing, and they eat dinner up there with mutton and chops and steak and all kinds of things, while the swill is served to the poor students down here. Swill. Literally swill. They sit and they watch the faculty members eating these big roasts while they're eating not even good stews. This has nothing to do with the sermon, but it's interesting. I had a friend, just got to thinking about it. My professor, who worked with me so long and hard and diligently, was invited to the upper table at Oxford, which is one of the highest honors that you can have, to be invited up there with the professors as a guest lecturer and so on. And he said he couldn't do it because he couldn't stand the difference between what they were eating and what was being eaten down below. But they tried to revise the system. This was fascinating. They wanted to eliminate that separation and have all students and faculty, this was 15 or 20 years ago, eat the same thing. You know who rebelled and said no? Students. You know why? Because they said, baby, when we make it as professors, we're going to be sitting up there and the rest of you. It's interesting, isn't it? Isn't it? Yeah, you could almost see that coming, right? We are the ones that are going to be chosen and risen high above and all that. Well, there is that sort of a picture here, but there's something else. Oil is something which we don't quite understand. We have too much fat in our diet. Totally, completely, 100%. Most of the world doesn't have enough fat in their diet, and oil is one of the sources of fat. Olive oil and what have you. Now, the sign of tremendous blessedness at this point is not only that you are being feted in a banquet, but they are taking precious oil, which is tough and difficult to come by, and are willing to pour it over your head. What an honored guest. Sometime when we have more time, I'll go into it a little bit about why the oil is so important in the Near East, where you've been out in the sun and your head's hot and dusty, and it cleans it off, and they literally do treat you like, we would say, like a king. Oh, can you imagine this man? He's gone through the valley. He's been led by God. His enemies have beset him all around, and his cup overflows.